Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And on this podcast it sees the return of Peter Ross. Hello Peter.
Hello there, thanks for having me.
And the last time we spoke to you was 3 years ago. I think it was the spring of 2014.
Right.
And it was when Daunderlust, Dispatches From Unreported Scotland came out. And now we're going to talk about the follow-up, The Passion of Harry Bingo. Mm-hmm. In those 3 years, it's fair to say Scotland has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Do you think did that have an effect on Harry Bingo, the book? That is.
It's difficult to say. I'm sure it must have had a certain effect. It's difficult to kind of quantify that or explain exactly what it was. But certainly, the first book, Daunderlust, which was a collection of journalism, was published, I think, just ahead of the Scottish independence referendum.
Yeah.
And it sort of, I think, somehow tapped into some of that kind of slightly wild energy that was around. The book, I should say, didn't take any particular position on Scottish independence, but I think it maybe tapped into the idea of a certain independence of spirit in Scots. Generally, not a political
absolutely,
but a sort of feeling to do with the idea that kind of character was a kind of great natural resource in Scotland. It's Scotland's character rather than it's Scotland's oil, and that was something that I wanted to kind of tap into. I think with that book, with this one, I think it probably emerges from a feeling, a slightly kind of hungover, listless, booze blues kind of feeling.
Yeah,
that's in Scotland generally. That isn't really necessarily to do with a feeling that I have of sadness, that the kind of the no side one or anything, because I've never taken a particular, because I'm a reporter.
Yes.
I've never taken a particular stance on the independence question.
Yeah.
But I think what I felt immediately after the referendum, the day after it, was a feeling of kind of a bit of emptiness and anticlimax, and some kind of melancholy that was abroad in the country generally. Maybe, I'm sure a lot of people were jubilant, but I think there was a widespread feeling, regardless of how you voted, of kind of sadness perhaps, or just something that the tide had gone out or something.
Yeah.
And I think probably some of that feeling has continued within the country as it's continued. Obviously the independence question isn't settled.
Sure.
And I think there's still quite a kind of there's a slight feeling of ennui in the air, and I think maybe some of that is in this book, which I hopefully haven't made it sound like too much of a downer. I hope it's I think it's hopefully funny in the same way as Daunderlust was, but I think there is also maybe an undertow of melancholy in it as well.
It's interesting because both books are made up of pieces of journalism and essays that you'd written at different times, and some of these, am I right, predate Daunderlust as well?
Yeah. So the chronology isn't totally. It's not as clear as this comes immediately after Daunderlust. Some of the pieces are very new, and some of them are really quite old. But
I think you're right. There is a feeling of it's more reflective, I think, as a book than perhaps Daunderlust, and I think that you had these individuals in Daunderlust that there was a sense of, look, what this what's possible in this small country, all these different things that you may or may not have known about exist, and there is still that in The Passion of Harry Bingo, but there is also more tales of regret's the wrong word, but there are more, as I say, more reflective stories in it.
I think it's probably more to do with me than it is to do with the people. I think it's probably more to do with the telling than it is with the tale. Right. I think the people in this book are still the same kind of characterful, colourful, kind of doty individuals that were in the first story. But I think there's maybe just something in the way that they're written up that has a greater sense of weariness of spirit than was in the first book, and I think that's probably just maybe to do with me. Maybe I'm certainly older by 3 years since that first book, and I just think maybe I'm a wee bit just a little bit more sad as well, I think, in my own life, and I think the world is.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what's going into the stories. It's not to do with the people, it's more just to do with some to do with the kind of the rhythm of the sentences and the word choice, and at that kind of cellular level, I think is probably what's happened with this book.
Yeah, so it is the substance and it is the way that it's written as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Before we leave though, the first, the idea of the referendum and what happened, the first chapter is called After the Referendum.
Yeah.
So why put this at the front of the book, and tell us a bit about it if you wouldn't mind.
Well, yeah, so After the Referendum is a piece, it's a story that I was commissioned to write by Scotland on Sunday. I did a series of pieces about in the lead up to the independence referendum for Scotland on Sunday, where I travelled around Scotland sort of speaking to different groups, asking them how they kind of felt about the independence question. So I would go to a particular part of Scotland and speak to older people, or I would be in a different part of Scotland and speak to women or kind of younger people, and or people. I tried to speak to that idea of the missing million, those people who had not voted before because they'd felt completely disenfranchised, people probably living in poverty, and that they just had never thought to vote for because they thought it would never make any difference to their lives no matter who was in government.
Yeah.
This time they felt differently and they'd registered to vote and they were likely to vote yes, and I went to speak to those people in Dundee. So the final piece in that series was I was dispatched on the day after the referendum, and actually the evening of the vote being counted, to write about the yes side, so the people that were specifically the yes voters. Yeah. A friend and colleague of mine, Danny Garavelli, covered the no voters, so it was very even-handed in the paper, even though it doesn't appear so in the story. So I basically spent the evening of the count at Aerodynamic Earth, the Science Centre in Edinburgh,
right,
which was meant to be the scene of the Yes campaign's victory party. So all the kind of the glitterati of the independence campaign were there. Brian Cox and Irvin Welsh and Martin Compson, as well as ordinary and inverted commas activists and so on. So people there watched as the votes came in, and if you remember, Kilmanshire, the vote from Kilmanshire came in first, and because I think it was expected that yes would win Kilmanshire, and in fact they didn't, immediately there was a kind of poll over the evening, and it went from bad to worse as far as that went. So I was there all night, and then the following day I spent the day in George Square, which obviously had been a kind of that was the sort of Freedom Square they called it, didn't they?
Yeah.
That was the sort of cultural centre of the Yes campaign in a way, and there were big rallies there. So I spent the day talking to people in George Square. Went there directly from Aerodynamic Earth in the morning. Spent the whole day there, and then in the evening I was there for the what you might call a sort of semi-riot between people on opposite sides of the campaign, although in fact it wasn't ordinary activists on either side that were involved in that. It was, I think, it was very much loyalists on one side, and then the people that were kind of throwing stones on the other side were more like kind of troublemakers generally. I think so. I think it was a proxy war really, that. But there was trouble. There was mounted police. There was things were on fire.
Yeah.
It was nasty. So that piece, the opening piece of the book, After the Referendum, covers that whole time from the previous evening, then into Alex Salmond conceding defeat, and then into George Square throughout the day, and the sort of sadness there, and then the kind of anger that swelled up in the evening. And I decided to include it as the first story in the book, really, because it was just a way of making a break, I think, from Daunderlust. It was a way of saying, Daunderlust led up to this particular moment in Scotland, and here is, to an extent, the aftermath. Obviously, as we've discussed, it isn't quite as straightforward as that, and some of the stories predate the referendum, but I wanted it to feel like a bit of a break. And also, I just thought it would be interesting to start with a piece that was a bit more about politics, because I think people probably don't really expect that from me so much. So I thought it'd be an interesting way to start with just what is obviously the kind of the central event in the life of Scotland, over the last over our lifetimes, really. Yeah,
and I think it made sense to me, because it was like, well, here is the event that has shaped Scotland in the last 3 years, and now I'm going to give you more of the unreported Scotland, and there is a feeling, I think, of a much more fractured country, for want of a better word, in some of the stories. I'm thinking of things like looking at small towns. In Praise of Small Towns is one of the chapters, and while it is in Praise of Small Towns, there is this underlying sense that industry that kept these towns going is now either gone or going, and that it's difficult to keep a lot of the traditions that were rooted in the small towns going.
Yeah.
So did you choose things like that with a sense that Scotland had changed, or was it just, did you see yourself, do you think, that you looked at?
Well, I chose the stories largely based on whether they were good enough to go in the book, really, because I didn't want to have this be the rubbish sequel to Daunderlust, basically. It was only really not long before the book went to print that a decision was made about whether there was going to be a book or not, because for a long time I sort of wasn't keen on having a second collection, because I didn't want it to be, as I say, a kind of a pale shadow, a kind of poor follow-up. But at a certain point I became confident that I had enough good material, and I decided, once I had the title story really, that this was a book. But in terms of a sort of deeper idea behind the kind of selection of the stories, I think there is always a kind of question or an idea about identity in a lot of the stuff that I write, and certainly as regards the piece you mentioned in Praise of Small Towns, and something like Nihil Sine Labore, which is about heavy industry in Glasgow and in Govan in particular. I'm interested in the idea that places have maybe lost their purpose, if their purpose was previously defined by the work that people did. That was the kind of binding thing in community. What is Govan for if it's not for shipbuilding? Although clearly it still is, because there are still yards there. But in terms of what is that stretch of the Clyde for? Glasgow, I think, still sees itself as a kind of heavy industry, as a place that makes things. Is that still true? So I kind of wanted to explore those ideas in those pieces, and I think these are stories of resilience, really, in as much as in Praise of Small Towns does find within the kind of character of the people and the humour of the people and the language and how they occupy themselves a great deal of hope. But I think in terms of just sheer brute economics, there is a real question mark hanging over places like Arbroath or Forth or parts of Glasgow for sure. So I think I'm seeing both sides of it. Both sides of the moon. The dark side of the moon and the light side in these stories.
I think Glasgow's relationship with the Clyde is interesting. A lot of people who come from Newcastle or Liverpool or London, even where there's big rivers, and there's been redevelopment of the river, and they say, well, why hasn't Glasgow done the same? I think it's either it's almost too painful to do, or there's still some kind of loose lingering sense that, but the ships might come back, or something might come back. It does, and probably the reason again is economic, and there's just been a lack of money. But whenever there's been an attempt to do something Clydeside, it's never really taken off. You've got these little disparate pockets of
I mean, that's a real sadness for me, because I think that river is just a tremendous thing in the kind of heart of the city. I mean, and also historically important. This idea that the Clyde made Glasgow and Glasgow made the Clyde. But it has become more of a kind of barrier than a living presence in the city. And if there was if you ever, hardly anyone, I think, really gets onto the Clyde and sees the city from the perspective of the river, and it looks amazing. Glasgow looks amazing from the river, And I really urge people to try to take every opportunity to see the river from that point of view.
It's an amazing view, definitely.
And I'd love for, I think there was some talk recently about some kind of water taxi to kind of bring people from Glasgow Airport into the city centre. And all that thing has to have all its logistics worked out and be costed and so on and so forth. But that'd be an amazing way to arrive in Glasgow, wouldn't
An
it?
incredible way, yeah.
You fly into Glasgow from somewhere, and you arrive along the Clyde. Absolutely terrific.
Yeah.
Much better than the way it's done just now.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Nose to tail for it. That's right.
Aye.
So you mentioned that it felt like a book when you had the central story and the title of the book.
Yeah.
The Passion of Harry Bingo. Now, we've already kind of hinted that this is quite perhaps a more reflective book, and there are lots of highs in it, absolutely, but there are also some lows.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess following a small Scottish football team is the ultimate expression of that, and perhaps Partick Thistle being almost the stereotypical one.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Harry Bingo.
Well, let me just say first of all that story was written initially for Nutmeg magazine, which is the Scottish football kind of periodical, which has lately started up, and it specialises in letting writers write at length about football. So I don't know really anything about football, and I've always kind of felt that to be a bit of a kind of lack in me as a sort of Scottish male.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to find out if there was a way of learning to love the game. Not just, because I like it, I do like it. And I like listen to Off the Ball and all that stuff quite religiously, but what I like about it is the soap opera of it and the humour and all that, but I don't actually really care about the game itself. And so I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll try to see if I can find various kind of gurus who can initiate me into the ways of football. And so the first person who I found to do that was a gentleman called Henry Calderhead.
Right.
Who's better known as Harry Bingo. And I'd actually met him a number of years ago when I did this story about the bingo in Partick. I'd spent a day in the bingo hall in Partick in Dumbarton Road, and I'd been introduced to this man, and he was already in his 90s by that point. And he told me that he basically goes to the bingo every day, apart from when he goes to see Partick Thistle play. So when I was thinking about, well, who can I encounter to kind of teach me about football, I thought, well, what about that old man? I wonder if he's still on the go. And luckily, through Twitter and his granddaughter Heather, she was able to put me in touch with him. So I went to see the first game of that season with him and his family. Partick Thistle versus versus Cali Thistle? I think it was Inverness Cali Thistle.
Right.
The fake Jags, as Heather calls them. And what interested me about him was that he'd been to see them play. And he's 97 now, he's maybe 98 now actually, but 97 at the time of writing. And he'd been going to see Partick Thistle play since the end of the Second World War. And I just think that once you kind of, there's being a fan, and then there's devoting your whole life to something. And I think once you kind of get to that point, it becomes about something much deeper than about football. And I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, but so the passion of Harry Bingo, it was that idea, that sort of older meaning of passion to do with endurance and kind of suffering, the passion of the Christ, that idea. So I wanted to really explore that in the story, and there's three parts to that story. There's the passion of Harry Bingo part, which sort of introduces the idea, and then there's a sort of final piece, which is about the terrible Rangers bus crash, which took the life of a young man called Ryan Baird. I went to his memorial service and spoke to fellow kind of Rangers supporters as the sort of concluding part of that book. And then the middle part of it, which is the comic part really, is when I went on the supporters bus up to Peterhead from Hampden with the Queen's Park support. And I was interested in them because they're an interesting club, because they're an amateur team and they're the oldest team in Scotland, and I think their supporters are quite eccentric in some ways.
When they play at the National Stadium, which is bonkers in the first place.
So I should say that they're all very different people, but there was a very when we went up on the bus up to Peterhead, which is a very boozy bus, I should say. There was a very touching moment of solidarity when we went past Donald Trump's golf course up in Aberdeenshire, and everybody kind of rushed over to the right hand side of the bus to give the tongs to the golf course. So I wrote that, of course, into the piece because I thought it was quite funny. But then I had to do a different version of it for The Guardian, because The Guardian wanted to reproduce the story.
Right.
So I thought, well, The Guardian readers are not going to know what the tongs is, so I changed it to the fingers.
Yeah.
But when it came out in print, it had been changed again to the finger, which I thought was, not only
something that Trump can understand.
well, exactly. It's like totally fake news. It was not only numerically inaccurate, but not quite as funny. I don't think.
Yeah,
So it's quite sad to see that happen.
It's an interesting take on, as you said, maybe identity. I think if someone has been doing anything for the length of time that Harry Bingo has been following Partick Thistle, then it's maybe linked into something you mentioned earlier on about people voting for the first time because they've previously felt their vote didn't count, so perhaps their voice didn't count. I often think with football, here's a chance for any tribal thing to be part of something and to still being an individual. And as you say, the characters in the bus are absolutely individuals. Right? Although there's a shared love of ska music, quite a kind of
Well, I think it's because Queen's Park play in black and white, and it's like the two-tone thing. So I think like a lot of the people that have been going to see them for a long time were into the specials and the beat and the selector back in the sort of early 80s, and they've just stayed with it. And I think they play Enjoy Yourself when Queen's Park, on those rare occasions when on those many occasions when Queen's Park score goals, they play Enjoy Yourself, which is only, I think, semi-ironic because it echoes around an almost empty Hampden,
But again, this idea that if you've got a team, I'm like you. I'm normally a Liverpool fan because when I was younger, I showed an interest in Kenny Dalglish more than a team, and my parents were just so glad it wasn't Rangers Celtic that they just threw mugs and all sorts of things like that at me. And so I've never really kind of regularly gone and stood on terraces and wind and rain and home and away and all that stuff. But I've got such admiration for people that becomes, as I say, a complete part of their identity. You say, well, first of all, I am, a Partick Thistle fan. I am father, grandfather, all of those things, but that is in the mix, which is something someone asked me, define yourself, I would never kind of really use that as one of them.
Well, and I think arguably it's become more important, as we were talking about, the decline of traditional industries, the breakup of the nuclear family, people no longer being as regular attendees at church, organised religion, all these kind of traditional signifiers of identity have kind of dwindled. But football remains, and I think that's perhaps why it's become, for some people, even more intense than it was before.
Mm-hmm. So I'm always fascinated that you managed to gain access to people and places and events that other people might find difficult to get across. I mean, quite a wide range of things. Like you're on a grouse shoot, you make it to the drag queen ball, there is the sex shop that you managed to go behind the scenes, there's the wall of death, you even spend time with the naked rambler. I mean, do you just kind of say, can I come in? And they say yes, and it's an interesting...
It is a bit like that, I think. Yeah. Partly, sometimes it's to do with reputation, I think. So like if you've done it for a long time and if people know your work, or if you can maybe show them your work, then they might decide to take a punt on you and trust you. But I think that's increasingly more difficult as people are increasingly suspicious of the press for various reasons. And I think that's actually something that's become more difficult since the independence referendum. I noticed that. I noticed that in the run up to the independence referendum, people have been very, very suspicious of journalists. And there's definitely a kind of much more widespread belief than there used to be that journalists are going to lie about you. If I can be as blunt as that. But I find that what does help is just the fact that. And this is something that I think I've come to understand about it, is that if you kind of go into it without any agenda or without any kind of side at all, if you go into it in a kind of good-hearted kind of way, with nothing but the best intentions, then I think people understand that. They just pick up on it and sense it in some kind of psychic way.
Right.
Just like we all have feelings about people when we meet them, don't we? And so I think people probably I hope they just get a feeling that I'm not going to do them over, and that I'm approaching them respectfully, and and I mean that, which doesn't mean that it's going to be a really sappy, soft focus kind of piece.
Yeah.
But it just means that there's no underlying agenda to kind of make them look foolish or to twist what they said. And I think people somehow just know that is going to be what happens, and that's a big help for me.
That's something I wanted to ask. Do people, when they say, of course you can spend some time with us, do they then try and sell you their version of the story, or are you allowed to spend the time to kind of make your own mind up? I'm thinking about the two. I'm thinking about actually maybe the two extremes would be a grouse shoot and the sex shop, both of whom have, for various reasons, dodgy reputations, put it that way. And I could see that they're going to, both of them might say, well, actually, we can get our side of the story over here.
I think, well, with the sex shop in particular, I spent some time ahead of that story meeting with the guys that own that place and sort of explaining to them what I wanted to do. And then they had a bit of a think about it and decided to allow me to come along and spend the day there. And so they decided to trust me, and then when they'd made that decision, it all went fine. Yeah. But there was just a little bit of preparatory work needed to be done there.
Because what I thought about that one was, it's not just them, it's the customers, that obviously there's a real trust thing going on between them and their customers.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they say, who's that taking notes in the corner?
Yeah. Well, with that, I didn't just randomly approach customers like I normally would do, just randomly approach people in a story. I was a little bit guided by who they thought might be willing to speak to me in those circumstances. Because obviously there's a kind of sensitivity around their business there, isn't there?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think it also helps that I'm spending a lot of time on the stories, or a relatively long time compared to a normal newspaper report. So just spending a whole day in somebody's company, they will, or more than a day, they will just loosen up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Gaeta Lee's called it the art of hanging out, and I think it's just that's just, if you just spend enough time just hanging around people and not making a nuisance of yourself, and just watching and listening carefully, more than speaking, then you get a lot of stuff.
And the grouse shoot, I mean, how was that? Because that again was people that maybe didn't want to.
Well, I think the guy that owns that grouse moor, a gentleman called Nick Harvey Miller, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think I just kind of explained to him what I wanted to do, and I think he just said they'll come along. I think I may have taken advice in that case from the Gamekeepers Association or something like that on who might be a good person to approach. So what you want really is someone who just doesn't care that much, who's quite willing to just say, oh, whatever, come along, what the hell, and I think people that own grouse moors are sometimes a bit like that, because I think it's a bit of a money loser a lot of the time. It's a bit of a status symbol. It's something that you have because you like to have your friends to come and shoot on it. So I think a lot of the time they're not really running them as businesses. It's a bit of a kind of indulgence and a plaything for them. So he was quite happy to have me come along, and then he introduced me to some of the kind of the people that were shooting that day, and some of them are more approachable than others. And I think I spoke to beaters and keepers. So the whole wide range is fascinating kind of subculture, and I had experience of it because I'd done grouse beating as a teenager.
Oh really? Yeah. Okay.
So I had sort of the experience of being accidentally shot at and all that kind of thing. It's one of the hardest jobs I've ever done, honestly.
Hardest job in the world.
Really, really difficult, not pleasant.
Yeah, I bet.
Walking over those hills for 15 miles a day or something in the rain, chucked into the back of a jeep with 10 other beaters and a couple of randy spaniels. It's not anybody's idea of a good time, really. Well, maybe some people's idea of a good time. It wasn't really mine. I might have just defined someone's fantasy there.
Yeah, you could have combined the sex shop and the grouse shoot. I mean, there are, again, just like as in Daunderlust, there's some wonderfully odd characters. I mean that in the most kind of positive way. You did manage to spend some time with the Naked Rambler, who is obviously a complex character, but I think what your piece with him? Did it got past the stereotype of a eccentric just getting his gear off for no other reason than he wanted to, and kind of looked at the kind of reasons behind it? And I didn't realise, I think this is right, that it was only in Scotland that he was getting arrested. Is that correct?
Well, what had happened was he, because it all kind of stemmed from the fact he was walking from Land's End to John O'Groats and then back again, and it was kind of he got. I'm trying to remember the exact chronology of this, but he did get arrested in Scotland, and then he had to kind of fly back up to Scotland to stand trial. And while he was on the flight, he went into the toilets and came back out naked, and then he got arrested on landing in Edinburgh, Glasgow, wherever it was he landed. So then he ended up having to stand trial in Scotland, and then he kept appearing in court naked, getting done for contempt of court. And then every time he got released from prison in Scotland, he just kind of walked out the gates of whichever prison it was naked, and got arrested again. So it was a vicious circle. So he was basically trapped in Scotland. And then when I encountered him, what had actually happened was he'd latterly been in a Kilmarnock prison, and I wrote to him in Kilmarnock prison and said, I'd really like to interview you. None of this is in the story, but it's still kind of preamble to it, really. I wrote to him saying I'd really like to interview you, and he wrote back to me to say, yeah, that'd be fine, but I'm actually going to get released a couple of days from now. So I wrote back to him to say, okay, fine, I will meet you outside prison, and hopefully we can talk. So I didn't know whether he'd got that letter or not, because just the timings of it. So I live in Glasgow, and I drove down to Kilmarnock to meet him out of prison at 6 a.m. on the day of his release, because I understood that was when he was getting out. So it was October, and it was pitch black in the morning. It was a real storm, actually.
Right.
So it was a horrible drive down to Ayrshire. Really dangerous roads and all that, and eventually I got to the prison in good time to meet him coming out. Sat in the car park watching the gate. 6 o'clock came, nothing, no sign of him. 6:15, still nothing. 6:30, I thought I'd better go over and find out what's happening here. So I went over to the prison gates and spoke to the guy in the gate and said, I'm meant to be meeting Stephen Goff here. And he said, oh no, he's not an inmate here. And I said, oh, what do you mean? He said, oh, he's not a prisoner here. But the guy had a bit of attitude, and I thought maybe he was just trying to get rid of me because he doesn't like journalists or whatever. So I eventually managed to get a hold of the Scottish Prison Service once they came in for the day, and they weren't going to tell me anything at first, but I think they took pity on me, and they said actually what happened was he got transferred the evening before to Saughton Prison in Edinburgh. Oh, right. So I drove over to Saughton with a photographer, and they said this was, by the time we got there it was like 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they said yes, he did get released from here at 6 o'clock this morning. But he didn't have any clothes on. So, on the one hand, he had a 4-hour head start on us, but on the other hand, he was naked. So we thought there was quite a good chance we'd be able to find him. Yeah. So we spent the whole of the day driving around up into the Pentlands looking for him, asking people, have you seen a naked man? Of course. almost down into the borders, asking people, burger vans at the sides of the road, all that. And then eventually, we were just in the point of giving up. We were actually going back to the office. We were driving through the village of Auchendinney, and he came along. I saw him coming along the opposite side of the road, and the pavement. He's very tall and he walks really fast because he used to be in the Marines. Right. So he was just coming along at speed along the pavement, nothing on him but the kind of floppy sun hat, the rucksack, the hiking boots, and I just pulled the car over to the other lane, without looking, crazy, and pulled in and just opened the door and stuck my hand in it, shook his hand. And he just kept going, but he said, yeah, come on. So I just had to get out of the car and keep up with him. And I ended up spending the night in his tent with him, and then walking with him for part of the next day. And it was really exciting, actually, because it felt like a proper scoop in some ways. Yeah. It's not the sort of work I normally do, but to actually kind of find him and get to spend the night in his tent was really great. Although I remember it was freezing, and I had to kind of hold my laptop to my body all night inside the sleeping bag just to try and stop it from seizing up, so that I could file the story the next day. But he was a great person to spend time with and to try to understand, you know.
Yeah, and do you think you did understand him?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think I understand that he's not crazy.
Yeah.
And I understand that it's not anything to do with sex, and he's not a naturist. He's
not an exhibitionist.
Yeah, he's trying to make a point about kind of civil liberties, which, you know, arguably he made the point a long time ago, and he was just harming himself by and his family by repeatedly getting arrested in that way, and just sticking with his guns so much. But I think I understood him, and hopefully kind of treated him sympathetically, but not unquestioningly.
There's a lot of traditions that you look at, again in both books actually, that things that have been happening in areas for a long time and they're still hanging on in there, and one I think of is the herring queens, or actually any kind of crowning of a queen as they do in the borders and various places like that. Again, it doesn't seem to be, as the way that I read it, it's not so much a dying against the light. These things are actually still kind of alive and important now.
Yeah, well, I think that those are good examples of traditions that are still very strong, but which I think are pretty unreported.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the borders there. I mean, those kind of common riding festivals in Hawick and Selkirk and Galashiels, those great equestrian spectacles, are things that I have written about in Daunderlust.
Yeah.
But everyone's written about them. They're widely written about and photographed, and no wonder. But these other festivals in the kind of lowland Scotland, I think are a wee bit unremarked, which seems a shame. So the Herring Queen is a festival in Eyemouth where a young girl is kind of chosen every year to be the kind of Herring Queen, and she's brought ashore wearing ceremonial robes, you know, and this has been going on since around the time of the Second World War. In some ways, I think what you might say about that is that you've had a situation there where the fishing industry's been in pretty sharp decline.
Yeah.
But this, which emerged from the fishing industry, persists and works as a kind of a badge of pride for the community and as a way of sort of honouring their traditions, even though the kind of the substance of them, the actual fishing, isn't there to the same extent anymore. But there's other kind of things within that chapter to do with the amazing Bo'ness Fair, for example, which I think is wonderful, where again they have crownings of kind of queens and so forth. But what they do there is the children who are elected to these kind of positions of honour, their families build like fairy tale castles and things like that in their gardens. And these things are monumental. So you've got like ordinary kind of council housing or modern estates with, you know, a gigantic Disney princess castle kind of built onto the front of it, you know, out of wood. Yeah. And they're absolutely spectacular. I sort of, in a way, feel they must reflect the sort of the monumental architecture of Grangemouth oil refinery that everyone can kind of see from around there. You know, it feels like there's a bit of that going on. Or some of the kind of other gala days and fairs, like in Lanark or in
Lanimer Day and all
Lanimer Day, where they have these incredible kind of floats. You know, they don't call them floats. That word's verboten in Lanark. They call them lorries, Lanimer lorries, where they are floats. Where they have tractors or lorries, and they make them up into pageants and loads of tissue paper. Really spectacular, amazing things. And I think they don't get enough attention. Yeah, they're really. It's like a Scottish Mardi Gras or something.
Yeah, yes, it is.
But with more buckfast and less rum. Or in Linlithgow, you know, the kind of marches in Linlithgow. The whole Scottish summer is full of these little spectacles, and I think I was so glad to be able to spend time writing about them, and hopefully they will get a bit more attention in the future.
I think that's right. I mean, it's a celebration and, again, a sense of belonging, a sense of doing something as community or group or you know, of fans or anything like that.
Everyone takes a turn, don't they? You know, the kind of whether you're constructing a Disney castle or you're just making the sandwiches for the day. You know, like blessed are the peacemakers, as they say in the piece. You know, it's like I think it's a real community event.
Now, there are a few chapters that look at more tragic events and how tragedy can shape lives and shape communities as well. Things like the Storm and the band who gave Glasgow hope. Why did you think to... well, first of all, maybe say a bit about the Storm, because I think it's a story that not many people perhaps know.
Yeah, so the Storm is the story of a tremendous tragedy that took place in the Uists in January of 2005, when there was a great storm across the whole of Britain and a lot of damage everywhere, but they were particularly badly hit in those islands, and 5 members of the one family were very sadly killed all at once when their 2 cars were swept off of the road. So this was a 3 generations of a family, really. And obviously when something like that happens in a very close-knit small community, it really hits the place hard. And I remember it very vividly at the time, and I remember, there was a lot of kind of attempts by the media to go up there and kind of get the story of the family, and the family didn't ever really speak about it. That was their decision not to really make their private grief public. But what happened was I got to know one of the members of the family, Marianne, and she eventually she got in touch with me to ask me whether I would be interested in speaking to her and speaking to other members of the family about what had happened, really for the first time, because they were hoping to get a fatal accident inquiry into the circumstances of those deaths, and what might have been done to prevent it. And so that was really what led me to kind of go to the Uists and spend time there talking to that family, really. So that's a story that I really wanted to try to... It was a very, very difficult story to write because it's quite technically complicated, to do with causeways, and there's a lot of kind of technical information in there. And also it's very raw for people, and you want to make sure that you get all the facts right in a situation like that, but also you're just careful of people's feelings. And it's so important when something has gone so badly wrong in their lives that you at least get the story right. So that was what I was trying to do with that one, really.
And the band who gave Glasgow hope, it was based around Esperanza, who were playing the night of the Clutha Vaults bar disaster, and I mean, really the hope that managed to kind of come out of that terrible event.
Well, it's called that because Esperanza means hope. It's a Spanish word for hope, and that they're a ska band that were playing in the Clutha when the helicopter crashed into it, and although they were all physically unharmed, I believe, one of their fans was killed in that accident, and there was a lot of their fans were in the pub that night. And I didn't write about the Clutha at the time. I wasn't part of the kind of reporting of that event, but I was really interested and moved by the idea that there was a kind of band playing at that time, and I saw, like everyone, I saw the kind of the t-shirt that had been put down with a little ska thing on it saying something like, I can't remember the exact words just now, I'm sorry, but it says something like, to my friends, one day we'll dance again. So this idea of, a musical community trying to recover together from this awful thing that had happened to them was interesting to me. So I did approach them and ask them whether they would be willing to speak to me, and that took a little bit of discussion and negotiation before, because there's a lot of people in the band and everyone had to agree. And I just I hope I managed to do that justice, really, because again, it's such a terribly painful thing, and such an easy thing to kind of get wrong in the reporting of it. I think they were happy with it, and I hope they still are.
What I took from that story again goes back to something that runs through the book is this idea of whether it's music, whether it's the gala days, or whether it's football, as you say, the Rangers tragedy that you looked at, that it allows people to grieve together, and there's a real kind of important aspect to that, that people are not alone, and the kind of redemptive nature of Esperanza then playing later on, and members of the family in the audience and things like that kind of really sum that up, I think.
Yeah, well, they allowed me to go to the they had a kind of almost like a kind of memorial concert for Mark O'Prey, known as Ops, who was the fan who was killed in the Clutha disaster. So they had a concert, a gig up in East Kilbride, which is where he was from, that his family were at, and the band played, and it was just this. I think it was an amazing thing to see. This kind of incredibly kind of propulsive, exciting ska band, playing these songs and everybody up dancing, and their awareness that one of them was missing, and that they were kind of continuing to sort of love the things they love as a way of kind of honouring his memory, So that was a tremendous thing to see.
When we were talking about the grouse shooting and the sex shop, we're saying how would you get people to trust that you're going to do the right thing, and then again, I know you've said there's a negotiation and there's time taken to get people who are supposed to know you, but I mean, are there times when you think, well, I'm not going to, I'm not going to follow this story up because I don't think it's the right thing to do? Or has that ever happened?
I don't think so. I've not really tended to. I mean, I've never really had much taste for going into situations in the immediate aftermath of the tragedies.
No.
I mean, the Clutha was different because there was just something about it that just kind of spoke to me. Maybe because I live in Glasgow and it was a Glaswegian thing, and somehow I just felt it. The response to that accident kind of said something about the spirit of the city. So I just kind of felt like I didn't feel like that I had ownership of the story by any means. It's not my story; it's theirs. But I felt like I understood the story and was able to kind of contribute something to it. But I don't. I think I would generally be a bit cautious about intruding into private grief too soon, really. But no, I never really feel. I rarely feel that I can't, find some way into a story.
Well, going back to kind of where we started with after the referendum, as I say, it's 3 years now. It's interesting that you said that the scars, if you like, from that particular vote are still felt today, and that's, I think, to me, that does feed into the book. This idea that it was an unsatisfactory vote for even people on both sides. There was people who perhaps voted no for really good reasons that they saw as being good reasons, and there was the people who voted yes who then felt betrayed, and it really kind of divided a nation, and those divisions are still yet to heal. Looking back now on Scotland, today, do you see an improvement in that situation, or do you see?
Well, I feel that the question just hasn't been answered, has it? I mean, and it may not be put again for a long time.
Yeah.
But that is definitely a fault line within the country, depending on which way your sort of allegiances lie.
Yeah. I guess even now, you said that. Round about the time of the referendum, perhaps continually, it was perhaps more difficult to get people to trust journalists in general.
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of distrust remains? And do you think the idea that well, I mean, I'm thinking now about the way that a lot of people said, well, the BBC did this, they reported it this way, or from both sides they would, say, well, you were biased in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of bias is definitely very widespread, and I think I would say pretty wrong-headed, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in my experience, and the experience of colleagues that I know well, whenever we kind of got sent off to do political jobs, we were never once told what to write. You know, I certainly wasn't. I know that my kind of colleagues weren't. But I think the perception is that you go out in a story with a particular, agenda. And certainly, there's no doubt that in terms of the editorial lines of newspapers, they were generally anti-independence.
Yeah.
But in the actual reporting, I don't think that was necessarily the case, certainly in every newspaper. But I think that the perception that newspapers are not to be trusted was intensified by that experience, and I think it's just one of the many problems that's fed into what's undoubtedly a crisis in Scottish journalism. You know, I think we can't hide the fact that we've got some serious problems within the Scottish papers.
Is that a crisis in Scottish journalism, or is it a crisis in journalism?
It's a crisis in journalism, but it's more pronounced in Scotland, where the resources are fewer. So I think just in terms of the amount of money that editors have to spend on their papers, it's just they've got so little money that it makes it difficult to be creative. In the best sense.
Yes, yeah.
And to properly resource the kind of storytelling you might want. And I think that's large. One of the problems there is to do with ownership. I think the people that own the Herald Group and the Scotsman Group are not particularly interested in words or pictures, which I think
that's a difficult. Yeah.
Which I think is obviously a drawback if you own newspapers, because if you want more people to read them, you need to improve those things.
Yeah.
And I just don't think there's a great will from the people that own them to they're interested in kind of increasing shareholder dividend.
Yeah.
They're not interested in telling the stories of Scotland. And people aren't stupid. If the papers keep getting worse, fewer and fewer people are going to buy them.
Yeah.
Less money is going to come in. It's going to be less attractive to advertisers. It's a vicious circle.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't really see a way out of it without a change in ownership of those kind of quality titles in particular.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we are doomed. I think it could be turned around, but I think it needs money and it needs will.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great individual writers.
Yes.
But they just need they need the money.
You said this, the Passion of Harry Bingo, the chapter was written for Nutmeg magazine. Are you finding that the kind of journalism that you do, which tends to be long form and essay-like, is more difficult to get into newspapers, and therefore you're having to look elsewhere?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I don't write very much now for the indigenous Scottish newspapers, simply because they don't have freelance budgets, and I'm freelance. Harry Bingo, that piece was written for Nutmeg and picked up by The Guardian. I'm not sure that The Guardian would have commissioned me to write it, because it's quite a hard thing to... It sounds rubbish when you try and explain what it is. But it was only because I was able... That's my problem generally, I think. A lot of my stuff just sounds rubbish when I explain what it is, and then once it's actually done, you think, that hopefully people would think that's quite good.
Yeah.
But I was able to show The Guardian the piece, and they bought it because of that, which was good, because I wrote it for Nutmeg without expecting to get paid very much money for it, because I wanted to write it, and that's a problem, because if we want to have good long form journalism in Scotland, which I presume we do, we either have to pay properly for it, or the people that write it have to be willing or able to write it without being paid properly, and that's not good, because that means you're not going to have kind of younger people kind of coming into the industry trying to do that stuff. It needs to be people that have got a bit of money behind them, or kind of a bit of a reputation or something. It's harder for kind of people, for new blood, to kind of break into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a worry for me, for sure, in terms of just platforms who can produce this sort of work.
So do you think, you said you weren't sure whether you were going to do a second book I know this is no time to ask you whether you'd do a third, but looking into the future, do you think it'd be more difficult to do these kind of, obviously if you're not getting the work to do, but where do you see the kind of future of stuff like this, of books like that?
Well, I mean, there's about 43 stories in this book and 42 in the previous one, so you're talking about 85 pieces which have been chosen from a much wider selection of things that I've written. So you need to have quite a big pool of stuff to be able to kind of choose and select the stuff in the first place. So I am still writing pieces, but not to the same frequency as I kind of was before. So I don't think there would be another book of this sort for me in a way. I'm not really sure at this point that I would even want to do a third sort of piece, which was a kind of collection of stories. I think if I do write another book, which I hope I will, I'll take one subject and tackle it at book length, but I don't think I'll do another collection. I think 2 collections. I feel like I've kind of said the things that I kind of want to say about Scottish cultural life, or there's some stuff from England in here as well actually, but I've made those kind of points through the work, and I don't really think I think I'd be repeating myself probably if I did the same thing again. These 2 books together feel like a bit of they're enough of a statement. They sum up what I've done so far with my working life, and if I write another one, as I say, I think it'll be a full-length treatment of some other subjects, but I don't know at this point what that will be.
Well, actually, I think they do work really well together as a collection of your writing, but also I think, as we said right at the top, of a particular time in Scotland which was unlikely to kind of be repeated again. They're not about that, but they kind of bookend that period, if it's to be bookended, really nicely.
Yeah, well, people should definitely buy both. I think that's what you're saying.
Oh yes, I'm saying they should definitely buy both, and also buy, keep looking out for good writers in newspapers and magazines, and because there is still some great writing out there. It's just perhaps a bit more difficult to find. But
yeah, I agree with that totally. As I say, I think there are some tremendous individual writers within the Scottish papers. It's just harder for them to kind of shine, really, I think, in the current situation. But I do hope that if these books of mine are read in future, like I think you were sort of getting at this there, I hope that people would be able to arrive at an understanding of what Scotland was like at this particular over the last kind of decade, really. They would get a feel for it and who the people were and what the kind of mood in the air was for reading the stories. They
take you on journeys to you've got these central stories happening, big stories in Scotland, obviously, and these take you to the other places and to meet other people, but they're kind of, there's links going on all the time. Well, Peter, perfect place to leave it, but thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And we'll be back again soon with someone completely different. Thanks for listening. Cheers.